Hello from Bangkok. My name is Rung Thep Gao. I'm here with our CEO, Dr. Mario Hardy. I'm welcoming you to our first PADA Spotlight webinar. This is going to be a series where members of PADA will share their knowledge and expertise in different topics concerning the travel and tourism industry. The first webinar of the series is about building resiliency through effective crisis communications. We have partnered with the Center for Crisis and Risk Communications, and here with me today are Jeff Angel and Ben Morgan, who will be presenting the webinar. And to start with, our CEO, Dr. Mario Hardy, will have a few welcoming words.
Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are. And thank you for joining us today with this webinar. As hopefully many of you know, PATA, we're a nonprofit organization to prides itself in promoting sustainable and responsible tourism throughout the world. And we've been around since 1951. And we have many hundreds of members around the world who are actually part of the organizations from both public and private sector. As Rung mentioned before, we partner today with an organization, the Center for Crisis and Risk Communications, to talk about tourism resilience and crisis communication specifically. We all have either experienced or seen different type of crisis around the world. Often when we think about crisis, the first images that comes to mind are terrorism attack or airplane crash or natural disasters. But there are many, many forms of crisis. It could be about the environment, it could be cybersecurity, data privacy. It could be many, many other forms. The only certainty is that there will be other crises moving forward. We just don't know when. And I think it's very important for all of us in our sector, in our industry, to be well prepared, to know exactly what to do, what to say, how to say it, to who to address to, who's your audience, when a crisis happens. And so we've partnered with the center to help to discuss with us today a little bit about what are these first steps that you're supposed to do. What are the things you need to keep in mind? What are the do's and don'ts in the crisis communications? And we've seen many situations over recent time where we've seen really, really good communication situations that have been extremely well addressed, but unfortunately many, many others who have not been addressed properly, and the recovery time becomes a lot longer. So in our sector, in the tourism sectors, for PATA specifically, we focus very much on the recovery part. After a crisis happens, to helping destinations, to help our members to recover. Recovery means getting your tourists back into your destinations as quickly and safely as possible, and spread the word that it's okay now for you to come back and visit and enjoy these beautiful destinations. So there are challenges around that area, and with the help of Jeff and Ben today, hopefully we'll learn a little bit more about best practices and help you to move forward. So thank you very much. I'll pass it on back to our host.
Yes. So I'm happy to officially welcome Jeff and Ben. And also before they're gonna start the presentation, please know that we are open for questions and answers at the end of this webinar. So if you have any, you can submit them into the question and answer box through the Zoom application. Okay, please, Ben and Jeff.
Thank you, Mario, and thank you, Rung. It's a pleasure to be here today with both of you and all your PATA members. I just want to extend a thanks on behalf of myself and Ben. Just quickly to give you a background on us, both Ben and I are principals at the Center for Crisis and Risk Communications. I bring 25 years experience in crisis communications and public relations experience in North America and in Europe. I was the former chairman of the North American Airlines Public Relations Association out of New York. I was also the senior vice president of communications, the Americas for British Airways. for a number of years, and I've worked, as I mentioned, in Canada, the US, the UK, and the European Union with a number of Fortune 500 companies. I'm going to ask Ben to introduce himself, say hello, and briefly chat about his experience.
Well, again, and just like Jeff has said, thank you so much for the invitation to join PATA and all of the members. We're broadcasting to you from Calgary, Alberta in Canada today. It's just about 10 o'clock p.m., so we hope your day is going well. As Jeff mentioned, I'm also a principal here at the Center for Crisis and Risk Communications. Actually, after 16 years as an advanced life support paramedic in the city of Calgary, I returned to school and did a Master of Arts degree in professional communications, which kind of led me into a new career of crisis and risk communications. I was the lead of crisis communications for the city of Calgary during the 2013 Calgary floods, which at the time was Canada's costliest natural disaster in history and the largest peacetime evacuation for Canada. I led the communications during that event. And a few years later, I would lead local communications during the 2016 Fort McMurray wildfires, which then surpassed the Calgary floods as Canada's costliest natural disaster and largest peacetime evacuation. Both of those events resulted in the evacuation of about 80,000 people for about a duration of about approximately 2 weeks. I am associate faculty at 2 universities here in Canada, Royal Roads University in Victoria, BC, as well as Mount Royal University here in Calgary, where I teach crisis and risk communications to the disaster and emergency management program and international peace building programs as well. So thrilled to be here, and just to share, we're just going to touch on the fundamentals of crisis and risk communications and hope that there's a gold nugget for you in there somewhere.
So I'm going to start by asking the question, would you be interested in a topic if you knew that the brand, the very brand that you represent, your reputation or the survival of your organization were at risk? And that's the very essence of crisis and risk communications. And that's what we're here to talk to you about today, is crisis and risk communications and how to help you and your organization become more resilient. Now, this is a very large topic. We typically do anywhere from a 2-day workshop to full crisis communications plan writing, preparation, training. We're going to touch on 5 areas in the webinar today. The first is the research and science behind crisis and risk communication. Everything we do at the Center for Crisis and Risk Communication is based in science and research. Ben's going to talk about the chair of our advisory board, Dr. Vincent Cavello. We follow his research, but everything is grounded in science. We're also going to talk about best practices in crisis and risk communication, our experience with those, as well the keys to communicating. There's a number of keys that are important. We're going to talk on those in this webinar, and the components required for planning and executing communications, as well as a number of tools that we're going to give you. So that's again, this is a very large topic. We're going to touch on those 5 areas, and I'm going to turn it back to Ben to ask him to lead you through, and we'll start with the science and research behind crisis communications.
Thanks, Jeff. So the really fun thing about crisis and communications is that this is a communications practice that is proven by science. There is a lot of science and research that goes into how we approach here at the Center Crisis and Risk Communications. As Jeff mentioned, we do follow the research by Dr. Vincent Cavello. He is one of the founding researchers of this profession, crisis and risk communications. He has a PhD from Columbia University as well as a bachelor and a master's from Cambridge University. He actually started his educational journey in neuroscience. So he's studied and dissected the human brain, and he connected this idea of communication profession to his neuroscience research. And he's been able to track through MRIs and brain probes how certain language, the structure of sentences, formulation of messaging, how that tracks through a human's brain. And then he's developed a variety of models based on his research. He is the director for the Center of Risk Communications out of New York, and he's our senior advisor here at the Center for Crisis and Risk Communications. All of the research that we're talking about today during this webinar is Dr. Cavello's work, unless it's stated otherwise. So that's the attribution to Dr. Cavello. There's a big connection between when we talk about crisis and risk in your own organization. It's critical that you have a look at your organization and identify where your key areas of risk are. What are you at risk for? And that will help set you up for what we'll talk about in a bit about preparation. So how do we define risk? Well, Dr. Cavello defines risk as a threat of loss, which is real or perceived, to that which we value. And specifically speaking to the travel industry, I as a customer, I as a tourist, I expect that I am going to have a safe, fun, engaging, life memorable vacation. And that's right from the flights to the customer service to the hotels to the amenities. And even if there's a disruption to that, then your organization may potentially be at risk for something that is real, something that really happened, or something that I as your stakeholder perceived, that I perceived that I did not get value or I lost some value in that experience. So that'll help me as an organization work through and work towards the planning for my crisis communications plan. I need to understand where I'm at risk so that I can start to build my plan for crisis. Dr. Timothy Coombs says that a crisis is the perception of an unpredictable event that threatens important expectancies of stakeholders and can seriously impact an organization's performance and generate negative outcomes. So there's an event that has occurred, it's unpredictable, or in some cases it can be predictable if we look back at our risk assessments, but it's not matching my expectancies as your stakeholder. Another way to look at crisis is it's a situation that overwhelms our capacity to meet our stakeholder expectations. So we're in an event and we're being overwhelmed and not meeting the expectations of our stakeholders. Dr. Cavello works through crisis and risk communications, and Dr. Cavello will say that crisis and risk communication is a science-based discipline. And here's where it gets really interesting from the science perspective, is that high concern and high stress situations change the rules of communication. It also changes the rules in operations, but we're speaking specifically to communications. One of the rules that high stress, high concern situations affects is the human ability to recall information. So under normal circumstances, the human brain is able to recall 7 pieces of information. If you look at your phone numbers as an example, most phone numbers when they were first created were built with 7 digits, because that's what the typical human brain can process, 7 numbers, 7 bits of information. However, under a high stress, high concern situation, the typical human can only retain or remember 3 pieces of information. Their emotions, their awareness is in such a state that they won't remember or process more than 3 pieces of information. And that's going to become important as we move through today's webinar. Dr. Cavello also says the key to crisis and risk communication success. So if you want to be successful in communicating during high concern and high stress situations, the key is to anticipate, to prepare, and to practice. And that anticipation comes from starting to understand your key areas of risk. Once you understand those key areas of risk, we'll build a plan, build a communications plan to support those key areas of risk. And once that plan is built, practice it. Practicing your plan will help identify gaps. New risks may emerge, and your staff and your teams will be more comfortable operating inside of a high stress or high concern situation. So crisis and risk communications, if done effectively and done well, because we've anticipated, we've prepared, and we've practiced, will provide people, your stakeholders, sense of hope, self or community efficacy, will provide a sense of safety, calm, and connectedness if crisis and risk communications is done well. When in crisis and risk communications practice, when people are concerned, stressed, or upset, so when people are concerned, stressed, or upset, high stress, high concern situations, they want to know that you care before they care what you know. They don't want to hear stats. They don't want to hear numbers. They don't want to hear plans. They want to know that you care about them. Your organization is putting them first. They want to know that you care before they care what you know. And in this high stress, high concern situation, they will have difficulty hearing, understanding, and remembering information. We're not processing 7 bits of information like we do under normal circumstances. We're only processing 3. So they have difficulty hearing, understanding, remembering, and processing information. People that are stressed, upset, or concerned will also focus on what they hear first. Your first message is what will resonate with them most. And that will be important, again, as we work through the webinar in preparation. The good news is that most of the concerns and questions of upset or concerned people can be predicted in advance. There are a lot of resources that we have available. Dr. Cavello's team has done an incredible amount of research. And one of those documents is the 77 most commonly asked questions during a disaster. They can predict what journalists and your stakeholders are going to ask, what they're going to want to know when they're stressed or concerned. And so we can help prepare those messages well ahead of time. That's for you, Jeffrey.
Thank you, Ben. We're going to talk now on some of the best practices in crisis communication, and I'm going to offer up a case study of something that I was intimately involved in, and that was the crash of Concorde, which happened in July 2000. Now, this was an Air France Concorde. I worked for British Airways. Just to remind you, there were 100 passengers on board, 9 crew. They all died, as well as 4 people on the ground. It was a very tragic accident and heart-wrenching for everyone involved in that, but obviously the friends and families of the people that perished in that. When I was at British Airways, we had lost contact with our Concorde. So when it flies, Concorde flew at about 65,000 feet. And so it's out of touch for about an hour as it flew from New York to London. So we were unsure of what happened to our Concorde until the media reports started coming in that it was an Air France Concorde. What had happened is that we had, at British Airways, I was in the New York office, we had given out all of the British Airways collateral to all of the media in North and South America. So they had pictures of Concorde, and CNN had this collateral available. So when they were reporting on the crash of Concorde, the picture that they used was a British Airways Concorde, and CNN put that on their live feed. And so we had an issue at British Airways. We had an issue. So when we talk about, Mario talked about at the beginning, the difference between we're going to have different types of crises. Nothing had happened to the British Airways Concorde, but most of the world was seeing the British Airways Concorde under the banner of Concorde crash. So part of being able to react in a crisis, Ben talked about the preparation, but after the preparation and the practice that we did, we were able to respond. So when this came on CNN, I picked up the phone to CNN and I asked to get through to the newsroom in Atlanta. And I said, look, this is inaccurate. You're scaring people. You're scaring our customers. And frankly, I expect more of CNN. I told them that they had a minute to get this off their screen, or that we would consider legal action against CNN. I made my case. We acted decisively, and within a minute that was brought down. And they didn't have a picture of an Air France Concorde until the pictures started coming in from Paris. So again, just a reminder that this was a crisis can be a threat of loss, real or perceived, to that which people value. So setting the record straight is very important. Taking decisive action and being empathetic as one of your first key messages is critically important. I'm going to move into the recovery component right now. Because British Airways was so closely associated with Concorde, we worked jointly with Air France. We worked with the New York City and state and the US federal government, the UK government, and the French government. And we had a joint task force, and we dealt with our customers authentically and directly, and we took accountability for that. So one of the things that we did, we brought our top 200 Concorde customers together at a restaurant in New York City, and we physically gave them pieces of the new of the Kevlar lining. Ben, if you could go back for a sec, sorry, to the left screen. So that's the restaurant we had a private the private dinner at, but we showed them pieces of the Kevlar lining. There we go on the left. That's actual lining that was going inside the fuselage of Concorde to prevent another fuel leak, because it was determined that the tires shredded after they hit a piece of metal on the runway, punctured the fuselage of Concorde, and then that leak ignited, and that's why Concorde crashed. So we also showed them pieces of the new tire that we were going to put on Concorde, and we passed that around. We also showed them pieces of the insulation that was going around all the wiring. So we dealt with our customers authentically. We were direct. We were upfront. We put their safety first, and we wanted to show them that. So we brought 200 of them together at the Four Seasons restaurant in New York. It was a very expensive dinner, but it was very well received by all of our customers. In the research that Dr. Cavello has done, that your trust factors, the listening, the caring, and the empathy, and the compassion, if you don't establish that in the first 90 to 30 seconds in handling a crisis, you can lose 50% of your audience. So there are other components, including your own competence and expertise, your honesty and openness, and there are another of other factors that are involved. But out of the gate, it's important to listen, to be caring and empathetic. Otherwise, you can lose half your audience with that. So one of the best practices, the three things that we would ask you that you remember from best practices is demonstrate that you care. And we do that with compassion, empathy, and caring. That is rule number one. Best practice number two is to communicate authentically and transparently. It's 2019. People's detectors on whether you're sincere or insincere, they've never been higher. So it's critically important that we be authentic and that we be transparent. If there's an issue, we need to address that head on. We can't dodge it. We can't hope people aren't going to ask difficult questions. We need to be direct and upfront with that and be authentic to the organizations that we are part of. And the last one is to take accountability. It would have been easy to say, well, that wasn't a British Airways Concorde that crashed. It was Air France and leaves everything to Air France. But that would not have been caring or empathetic to our customers. It would frankly have been a dereliction of our duty as an organization that cares about our customers. So we took that on. We owned that. And we, as I said, we worked together jointly with Air France, the three levels of national governments, the many levels of local governments to relaunch Concorde. I remember Mayor Giuliani told me, and this goes to your point about resiliency, Mario, is that he pulled me aside before and he said, Jeff, this is not just about relaunching an airplane. We relaunched it in November 2001. That was 2 months after September 11th had happened in New York. He said, this is critically important to both New York City, New York State, and frankly, the country. So that concept of resiliency is critical around the world. And we can deal with that and build it by demonstrating that we care, communicating authentically and transparently, and taking accountability for that. It's 2019. It's not good enough to say, well, that didn't affect us. I've put on this slide. So these are pictures that are around the world now from Hong Kong in the last 24 hours. So if anybody listening has any operations or customers or stakeholders in Hong Kong, it is critically important that you should be asking yourselves right now, what's our crisis and risk communications plan? You should be proactively communicating with your stakeholders. If it's still safe to go to Hong Kong, if it's still safe to engage with your organization, it's critically important that you communicate that to your stakeholders. If it's business as normal, it's critically important to do that. If it's not, and you've had to adjust because of the protests, and they appear to be ongoing, it doesn't appear that there's resolution yet for this issue. But if you need to adjust, it's critically important that you communicate that to your stakeholders. So I would encourage everybody on this call and that you forward this to, or that listen, I would ask the question, have you thoroughly assessed your organization's key areas of risk and your crisis exposure? If you were a customer or stakeholder, how would you be thinking? What would you be acting? Nobody around the world is not asking questions about Hong Kong. If they have upcoming travel to Hong Kong, they are concerned. They are going to have questions about security, safety, what's changed, what hasn't changed. So these are questions that I would implore that you ask yourself. Have you assessed your organization's areas of risk and crisis?
So I just want to share a little bit about this. Could be a whole webinar in itself. There was a tremendous amount of learning for us. Just real briefly, City of Calgary is in Alberta, Canada, population of 1.3 million people. We have two rivers that run through the center of our city, and we are about a 45-minute drive, so 100 and so kilometers from the Canadian Rocky Mountains. And what happened in 2013 is we had a rapid snow melt of the snowpack in the mountains that combined with very significant rainfall. We ended up evacuating 26 large communities, including our entire downtown core. We lost all of our infrastructure, so power, roadways, bridges, etc. 80,000 people evacuated. And I'll just play a videos. I've got a video here that just demonstrates a little bit of what we experienced here in Calgary in 2013.
We have major flooding.
Remember, we are still under a state of local emergency.
The roar of the river is terrifying.
Parts of the city are complete ghost towns.
75,000 people have been told to leave. These are tragic circumstances.
The Trans-Canada Highway, gone.
The Bow River looks like an ocean.
I don't think any of us have ever seen anything like this.
There is a whole spirit throughout Alberta and southern Alberta that we're not going to let this beat us down. We're going to build back. We're going to be better. We're going to be stronger.
Southern Alberta is a community that helps itself. All of the services that have come together has been a huge team effort.
The people out there over the last 2 weeks have absolutely blown us away. They are living the good neighbour.
I have lots of family and friends that are helping, and it's great. We got fantastic help.
I've seen such energy for the community spirit.
I don't know who has inspired who, but now we're in a position where everybody's inspiring everybody.
The spirit of our city!
Everybody's been so helpful, it's impossible for me to thank.
When visitors come for the Stampede, they may not see Calgary at its prettiest, but they will see Calgary at its best.
We want to see the Stampede event go on because we think it's an important event for Calgarians to have an opportunity to celebrate, even in adversity.
So one of our key messages in there, I don't know if you caught it, it was our mayor, the mayor of Calgary, who said, you may not see Calgary at its prettiest, but you will see Calgary at its best. And what this event did for our city was demonstrate the incredible resiliency of our community. If you've not heard of Calgary, we host the greatest outdoor show on earth, the Calgary Stampede. It's an annual event. We have visitors around the world that come to Calgary to attend the Stampede. It has never missed a year. For 100 years, the Stampede has been going on. And the Stampede was scheduled to start within 2 weeks of this flooding event, which it occurred because of the way we were able to rally the community. A couple of key things drove our communications during the Calgary flood. Our mayor kind of led the way with the perspective or the stance that if we know it, Calgarians will know it. And what he was meaning by that was if we have some information, we're not going to hold it back from our community. If we know it, we're going to tell our community about it. We're going to make sure that they have just as much information as we do. We learned that there was a distinct difference between information and communication. Communication can be very strategic. It can be very mindful, very thoughtful, put it together in a plan. But information, like the bridge is gone, that road is closed, people want information. They want to know that you care, and then they want to know that you're keeping them informed, that you're keeping them engaged. Also, communication channels and partnerships was another learning opportunity for us. Partnerships are critical. Who are your neighbors? Who can you lean on? Who can you get to help support you, your organization, your community? And of course, anticipate preparation and practice. One of the things we did during the Calgary floods that I thought was relevant for this webinar audience was one of our key focuses was letting the community, letting our world know that we were back on our feet, that Calgary was open. our leaders here were very focused on our economic resilience, very focused on getting businesses back open, generating awareness within our province that, you know, we're good to go. And so within 2 weeks of this flooding event, although we were still in crisis mode, although we were still rebuilding, although we were still taking care of our community, we built in a marketing campaign that let the world and our community know that we were open. And it just looks a little something like this.
Calgary is great every summer. You get a chance to visit the Calgary Stampede, the Calgary Folk Festival, all the other amazing festivals. You get a chance to experience the energy of these streets. But this summer is the time you want to be here. You want to see what this community has accomplished. This community was pushed down and we are pulling her back up. And this is the time you want to be here.
Association here in Calgary, and it highlights all of the attractions and restaurants and parks and all the things that people can do here in Calgary. And it was really important to partner with our travel association to deliver the message that the world watched our community flood. It was important for us to let them know that we were open and that you could access all of our services.
So we're going to talk about the keys to communicating now, and they really come down to three things. One is anticipation, that anticipating and using your imagination as to what could happen. The Commission on the 9/11 attacks said the biggest failure of the intelligence community was imagination. They did not anticipate the type of attack that could occur in New York City. Then preparation. It's important to prepare your crisis and risk communications plan, to engage your organization and your stakeholders internally so that you are able to go on to the third step, which is practice, practice, practice. It's important that you're able to do all three of those. Key North Stars are open, honest, and transparent. I just had a question on the Q&A from a PATA member that asked about the importance of transparency. If information gets out later on that your stakeholders would have wanted to know, you will lose credibility instantly. So that doesn't mean you just dump out information, but it is important to thoughtfully process that information in an open and transparent and honest way. The next slide we're going to talk about is a high stress and high concern situation. Ben talked about that people are only going to remember three things. It's important that we don't use acronyms or technical jargon. It's important that we say words and that they're not big words. Now is not the time to impress with our vocabulary. Remember that during a crisis, the average person is going to take in at a grade 4 reading level. So that's not very high. It's important to be clear. It's important to go slow. And it's important to remember that your audience is under high stress and that they can only take in so much. That's three things. One of them, the first message needs to be caring and empathetic. We're going to talk about now the components for planning and executing communications. The first one, as I talked about, is anticipate. Identify your key areas of risk, your organizations or the environment that you operate in. If you have operations in Hong Kong right now, this would be an excellent example of needing to identify your key areas of risk. Do an environmental scan so that you can understand where your organization is at risk and what the what the areas that need to be addressed are. So the next one is the plan. When Mayor Giuliani came to office in 1995, the FBI told him that there was a 100% chance of a terrorist attack in New York City in the next 5 to 10 years. So he took out to bring in the best and the brightest and to prepare their crisis communications plan. So that's critically important. Now is not the time to wing it. Now is the time to plan for the next crisis and assess your risk areas. So the next slide, you heard me say it before, is practice, practice, practice. Firefighters, police officers, first responders around the world, they practice, they train to get it right. The same thing needs to be done with crisis communications plan. You need to know your internal stakeholders. You need to know your external stakeholders. At minimum, so when that crisis hits, you can execute as flawlessly as this slide shows. At minimum, organizations should be doing a crisis communications tabletop exercise at least once a year. So we're going to talk about the crisis communications tools now. I'm going to throw it back to Ben.
So just a couple real simple tools for you to consider. As mentioned, under normal circumstances, the human can remember 7 pieces of information. During high concern situations, that rule changes to remembering 3. So here's a tool for you to consider when drafting or writing your communications in your plan. This is a Dr. Cavello tool or formula. You have 9 seconds to say 27 words delivering 3 key messages. 3 is the magic number because the human brain can process and remember 3 things. You've got 9 seconds to say it, and that comes out to 27 words. Of those 3 key messages, consider the CCO formula. That stands for caring, compassion, and optimism. So people want to know that you care before they care what you know. Therefore, the first message is one of caring. The following message is of compassion, and the last one is optimism. You may also see this as CCC, caring, compassion, and conviction, but it's a simple way to help formulate your messages. We take this again and we draw it out a little bit more into what's called a message map. Message map helps organize your information and thoughts within your key messaging. So a key message about your key message might be public safety is our top priority. And it's great to say it, but you need to support that message. Public safety is our top priority. We've called the armed forces. We've got additional help. We've put in security systems. We've added monitoring systems. So the message map, and we can help work through this, helps organize your thoughts, your facts with your messaging. Beth mentioned Rudolph Giuliani from the anticipation practice. One of the most powerful speeches from Ground Zero after 9/11, when Rudolph Giuliani was asked the question, how many people are going to, or how many people have died? His reply was, the number of casualties will be more than any of us can bear ultimately. That answer was written 6 years before the planes hit Twin Towers, and Rudolph Giuliani had practiced that for 6 years. And man, did he deliver that. That's just an example of anticipating. So Giuliani had a really good conversation with the FBI, understood there was a risk of terror. They made a plan and he practiced it. And sure enough, 6 years later, there he is at Ground Zero giving a press conference, answering one of the predicted questions that we knew, or Vincent Cavello knew, that Giuliani would have been asked.
This is our last slide, and it's just how we can help your organizations. As Mario mentioned off the top, we partnered with PATA. So at the Center for Crisis and Risk Communications, We can write your plan. If you already have a plan in place, we can audit your plan. We can help rehearse. I talked about the different exercises, tabletop, functional, experiential. We'll put together a press conference. So if you have to handle a difficult press conference, we'll put you through that training. We can help execute your plan. We run 24/7 at the Center for Crisis and Risk Communication, so you can call us anytime. We can also provide training, coaching, and mentoring. So that's our presentation. I want to thank you very much for listening and your attention. We'll turn it back to Arun and Dr. Hardy, and if you have any questions, we'd be happy to answer them.
Yes, thank you very much, Jeff and Ben, for the presentation. Very insightful and interesting. I'm checking right now if we got any questions from the audience. There was one question that you answered already. So since there are right now no questions from the audience, maybe I can throw a question at you that you could answer. You just talked about like 9/11 and how the mayor was very well prepared for that, and that like some of these answers had been like written 6 years in advance. So I was wondering for like maybe a normal company that is not the government, that is not as prepared, like what does it take, or like roughly is there like a timeline or something that you can give, like how long does it take to prepare for like these kind of like situations?
So Rune, what I'll suggest to that is it depends. So I would encourage any organization to have a plan and pre-scripted messages. The interesting and the interesting thing about this profession is that we can't predict everything. We've worked through and we've understand where we're at risk. We've built a plan, but we haven't been able to predict everything. So if we have a plan that we can work from and adapt, then we're much quicker to respond to or get our messaging out much quicker than if we didn't have a foundation to work from at all. So in my experience, historically, it would take 3 to 4 hours before we were getting messaging out. That's no longer acceptable in today's environment. Stakeholders expect you to be a part of the conversation almost immediately. The Boston bombing during the Boston Marathon, the conversation around that event started 42 seconds after the first bomb exploded. And so the authorities, they took about 3 hours to be a part of that conversation. And so that ended up creating a very significant vacuum, an information vacuum, that citizens and other people that were watching started to fill. They filled the void with inaccurate and damaging information. And so it's not I don't think it's a matter of how long does it take, it's how long do you have. And it's not long at all in today's connected wireless environment where stakeholders, public, expect you to be having a part of that conversation right away. So building that plan sets the foundation and helps set you up for success to be able to respond much quicker than we used to do years ago.
Okay.
There's a number of questions appearing. Yeah. I have one question. It refers back to what you just said, but what would be the expected time for people to answer? So let's say something happened at noon. How long after you would expect to see some communication out there? Because in social media world, within seconds, the world already knows.
Yeah, absolutely. So the critical point is making sure that the information your organization is sharing is accurate. And it takes some time for us to verify information, but there's opportunity to say right away, we are aware of an event. We have this is what we've done, ABC. We've dispatched authorities, responders are on the way. And as soon as we confirm and validate information, here's where we will post it for you, right? So it's, you can be a part of that conversation right away. It's called a holding statement. You can have holding statements on social media. You can have holding statements in media relations. So get out as soon as you can, but don't start releasing information that's based on speculation. It has to be verified, even though people that are posting, watching the event, they're posting already. But you can still have a voice and just say, we're aware, responders are on the way, and here's where you can find valid information as soon as we have it available.
Okay. Thank you. So yes, we got some questions from the audience now.
Lots of questions.
Lots of questions, actually. So how about, one question was answered already, but yes. So this one is, I will just read it out and then you guys can go ahead and answer it. What would you advise Sri Lanka to do to restore its reputation past the terrorist attacks in April?
So I just answered this one, Roon, but I'll take it head on. Sri Lanka is a very important country. It's horrible what happened. The government needs to reestablish a sense of trust and safety with the traveling public. So questions like, how have their security protocols changed? What have they done to assess threats against the public in the country? This is an opportunity for the Sri Lankan government to really establish trust and confidence, restore confidence within the public. I would put together, if it was me, I would put together a plan that identifies all those questions. What has changed? Where have they made improvements? And be open and honest about that with the traveling public. That trust needs to be reestablished before the natural inclination of going out to advertise the great beaches and resorts and how great Sri Lanka truly is. That trust with the traveling public and that sense of security needs to be reestablished, and that needs to be done by the government being open and honest and talking about the security. How has it changed? How has it improved? What things are different now? That needs to be communicated to the public.
Okay, thank you. Then we have another question. So, okay, I think maybe you can address this one more time, because I think a lot of our attendees have the question of how transparent a company should be in case of a crisis. Yeah, maybe is there an advice that you can give to our attendees?
Sorry, Ben. So I answered that one. It's important to be transparent and open, but that doesn't mean you just dump information willy-nilly. It needs to be thoughtful. It needs to be strategic. It needs to follow the crisis communications plan. And as Ben said, we can't anticipate everything, but if we have a plan that we can work from, that's critically important. So transparent doesn't mean you give out all the information all the time as soon as it comes in. I would ask the question, do your stakeholders, would they want to know this? And what's the best way to communicate that information if it's yes? There are also some things, security and otherwise, that you might not be able to communicate, but that's how I would answer that. Ben, do you want to have anything to add?
No, I think that's great. There is a difference between being transparent and over communicative. There's a fine line sometimes when we talk about being too transparent, and the lawyers within our organizations have issues. So open and honest, I think there's an opportunity to be open and honest. And yes, we need to be transparent, but to what degree? And every different situation will help influence or shape that. But there has to be consideration given to the legal implications to your organization, and how you address that and when you address it. It might just be something as simple as different timing.
Okay. Thank you. And maybe one last question. So this is referring to the Queensland floods from 2011. And the attendee is asking, so how do you balance the message between we are open for business again and the message to generate support and empathy among audiences?
I'm just trying to find that one. So yeah, so balance between, so that was from Gabby. How does tourism get particularly managed and response managed balance, right? Generate support. Yeah, no, absolutely. So we actually ran during the Calgary floods 2 different streams. So there was a marketing campaign that was happening simultaneously as we were still in crisis mode. So although we were still cleaning up and we were generating community resilience and bringing community together to help with the cleanup and the support, it was also important to do the We're Open campaign. The We're Open campaign was driven behind the whole idea of economic resiliency. The longer small businesses remain closed, the greater they were at risk of going out of business. So that the Open for Business, the video I shared, was just a small portion of it. The message that underpinned that was support your local community, support your local businesses. So they kind of married together between helping people clean out their homes, but also getting businesses, stimulating people going back into the local coffee shop, right? So it's kind of part and parcel, and complementing each other, if that makes sense, Gabby.
Okay, thank you. I think you answered a lot of questions already, and I'm not sure, maybe you have a chance to answer some of the other questions that are coming up in the question and answer session. Else, as you put on your last slide, there's also an email to reach out to Center for Crisis for Crisis and Risk Communications if you have any other questions, or you can also email us. We can also forward that. So yes, just contact us if you need any further information or want to get connected to Jeff and Ben. Once again, thank you so much for this presentation. Definitely very insightful. Also for the PADA members and non-members that have been watching this webinar. And yeah, do you have any final words?
No, thank you. Thank you to both Jeff and Ben for taking the time to join us today, to share their knowledge, their expertise, their experience. Very valuable to many of our members, I'm sure. And as Rung mentioned, feel free to reach out to them or to reach out to us if you need any assistance or further information. We'd be happy to put you in touch with both of them if you don't want to do it directly. And follow us for future webinars. We'll be continuing doing others on other topics as well moving forward. And thank you to all of you who've taken the time to join us today. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Mario. Thanks, Rung. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye. Bye-bye.